Move Ohio State from the equation. Does Texas have the most talent in their wide receiver room in the country? On three, think
you
so.
are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we are talking about On3's top 10 wide receiver rankings in 2023. They have the Texas Longhorns at number 2. Did they get it right? Then after that, you will hear a conversation between me and Aaron Freeman, our Locked On Atlanta Falcons host. They are very excited about Bijan Robinson down in Atlanta. I'm excited to watch Bijan Robinson in that number 7 down in the ATL. So you'll really enjoy this conversation between me and our Locked On Atlanta Falcons host, talking about Bijan for the last 3 years at the University of Texas and then the future of Bijan down in Atlanta, Georgia. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So on yesterday's show, we did the top 10 quarterback room rankings from On3, and today we're discussing the top 10 wide receiver room rankings from On3, and Texas was in the top 5. So like I did with the quarterback rankings, I'm only going to discuss the top 5, and the top 5 was as such: Ohio State at number 1, Texas at number 2, LSU at number 3, Washington at number 4, and then USC at number 5, right? And so Texas does have a ton of talent in their wide receiver room, right? I can just tell you off top, I'm perfectly fine with them being number 2, really 1A, because Ohio State is going to be number 1 on any wide receiver room list. But the question is, can they live up to that ranking? Because I believe last year with Xavier coming off the freshman year that he had, Jordan Whittington coming back, Isaiah Nayor coming in the transfer portal, Ajay Hall coming in the transfer portal. Based on what everybody thought last year at this time, I would think that Texas had a top 10 wide receiver room. But we all know that didn't live up to it. So what does Texas need to do to live up to the number 2 wide receiver ranking this year from On3? I'll give you 5 things that need to happen for us to live up to that ranking. But first, let's start with the top 5. And of course, it starts with Ohio State, right? And they have become the gold standard of wide receiver recruiting and wide receiver development. When you look at the last 2 years in the first round of the NFL draft, we've seen Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and now Jackson Smith and Jigba all go in the first round. And really, you could say 3.5, 4, because Jamison Williams was at Ohio State before he transferred to Alabama, and then he went in the first round as well. And then when you look at what they currently have on campus, they have Marvin Harrison Jr., who is unquestionably the best wide receiver in college football right now. When I did the quarterback rankings, I said Caleb Williams was unquestionably the best quarterback, and that's why USC was number 1. Ohio State kind of has that same argument, right? And it's a shame Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't win the Biletnikoff last year. I think he has a really good chance to win it this year, depending on their quarterback play. Their number 2 wide receiver is Emeka Egbuka, who was the number 1 wide receiver in his class in 2021. And this is what he did as their wide receiver 2 last year: 74 catches for 1,151 yards and 10 touchdowns as wide receiver 2. Then their 3rd wide receiver is Julian Fleming, who was the number 1 wide receiver in his class in 2020. And then they have 3 top 10 receivers in this 2023 class coming into Ohio State right now. So I just listed the top 6 wide receivers on their depth chart. Marvin Harrison Jr., likely to win the Biletnikoff. Emeka Egbuka, number 1 wide receiver formerly. Julian Fleming, number 1 wide receiver formerly. And then 3 top 10 receivers coming in to this class. Talk about an embarrassment of riches. Brian Hartline deserves everything coming his way for what he's built at Ohio State. Texas is number 2. We'll come back to them. 3 is LSU. And I think LSU is kind of high. Now, they did have Malik Neighbors. He led the SEC in receiving yards last year with only 1,017. That's kind of crazy to hear, but it is true, and he is returning. So, that is good for Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier. They also have 2 other receivers that combined for 55 catches last year. Not a lot, but it is college production. And they have 2 top 100 recruits at the position: Jaylen Brown, who Texas was very interested in out of the Miami area, and then Shelton Sampson. So I think they have a good wide receiver room, but I think Washington and USC at 4 and 5 probably have a better argument to be at number 3 than LSU does, and I'll explain now. So Washington, who we played against in the bowl game, we know that Washington had the most prolific passing attack in college football last year. That's not opinion. It literally statistically was the best passing attack in college football last year, and they returned not only their starting quarterback in Michael Penix Jr., who led college football in passing yards last year, but they returned 2,000-yard receivers in Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillian. And I think, of course, the rest of the room, they have talent in it as well. Maybe not the depth of talent that some of these other schools like Texas, Ohio State, LSU, and USC do. But when you return 2 1,000-yard receivers in college football, I think that's crazy, and I think they should definitely be higher than 4 on the list, especially when we've seen the production from their passing game, and you would expect that they would do that again this year with more experience. And then USC at number 5. So they returned 3 receivers from their team last year that had 600-plus yards, Mario Williams being one of those. Of course, we're familiar with Mario Williams because he spent 1 year with Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. Then they got Dorian Singer to transfer from Arizona. I believe he led the Pac-12 in receiving yards last year with 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns. So he transferred to USC. And then they have 5-star wide receiver Zachariah Branch, who might be the most explosive true freshman in the country, right? When you talk about Zachariah Branch, somebody that is a slot wide receiver with track speed, right? He's really good. So I think that Washington and USC should both be above LSU. Maybe there's some LSU bias. They were number 2 in the quarterback rankings, now number 3 in the wide receiver room rankings. I would put them at 5, but nonetheless, I like the list. Ohio State, Texas, USC, Washington, whatever order you want to put them in, and then LSU at number 5. Now, let's talk about what you came here to talk about, the Texas Longhorns. And of course, they have probably one of, if not the most talented wide receiver rooms, top to bottom. If you remove Ohio State from the equation, I would say they do have the most talented wide receiver room, top to bottom. When you talk about Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington, Isaiah Nayor, Jonte Cook, Casey Kane, DeAndre Moore, Ryan Niblett, the list goes on and on, right? There's an embarrassment of riches in this wide receiver room right now. You can lose somebody like Brennan Thompson and still be number 2 in the wide receiver rankings. That's a credit to the way that this staff and Steve Sarkisian has recruited for the last 3 years at the 40 acres. But what do they need to do to live up to the number 2 recruiting ranking? Because like I said, last year, we probably had a top 10 room in the country in terms of talent, but we were not top 10 in terms of production. To me, 5 things need to happen for us to live up to this number 2 ranking this year. The first one is our top receivers need to stay healthy. When you look at Xavier Worthy, he was in a boot last summer for whatever reason. It probably was precautionary, but then he breaks his hand for the second half of the season, right? He needs to stay healthy this year. When you look at Isaiah Nayor, obviously he's coming off of a torn ACL, right? Needs to stay healthy. A.D. Mitchell had a huge ankle injury last year that limited him to, I think, only 5 or 6 games he played last year, maybe 6 or 7, right? So he obviously needs to stay healthy. And then Jordan Whittington, who was healthy last year, that was not the story beforehand, right? He had not played a full season until last year. So I'm going to knock on wood for all 4 of them, really. We need Jordan Whittington healthy for all of the games this year. That's the first step to living up to that number 2 ranking in the country. Then when you talk about Xavier Worthy, I still think that he's your alpha. He's your best receiver. He's the receiver that's going to keep defensive coordinators up at night, and his gravity is going to make it easier for every other receiver on the team. He's the receiver that most consistently can get deep and challenge all areas of the field in terms of for our offense and their defense, right? You just can't lose sight or, go to sleep, right, when Xavier Worthy is on the field. And I think he needs to crack 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns this year for Texas to live up to that number 2 ranking in the country. He did not get 1,000 yards his freshman year because we didn't play in a bowl game, ended up with 981. And then, of course, he had the down year last year. He only had 9 touchdowns last year, but he had 12 the year before. So he's averaging 10 touchdowns per season. And he should have had more than 10 touchdowns last year because when I look at it off the top of my head, he dropped a touchdown against Alabama. He dropped a touchdown against Washington, and he tripped on a wide open touchdown against Oklahoma State. So that would be 12 touchdowns right there. He's more than capable of getting 1,000 yards, especially if we play 14 games this year, which I think we should, 12 regular season games, Big 12 championship game, and a bowl game. And he's more than capable of catching 10 touchdowns because he did it his freshman year, should have done it last year. If he does that this year, I'm more than fine with Xavier Worthy's production, and he'll likely be a first-round pick. When you look at A.D. Mitchell, I'm not going to say that he should have 1,000 yards alongside Xavier Worthy, but he's definitely capable of being your 1A or one of the best wide receiver 2s in the country, right? There's no shame in that. I think this year for A.D. Mitchell to have a positive year as the wide receiver 2 of the Texas Longhorns, he needs to be somewhere around 70 catches, 850 yards, and 8 touchdowns on the season. I think that would be a really good year for A.D. Mitchell as wide receiver 2 next to Xavier Worthy, because we're still going to run the ball a lot. And then JT Sanders is going to catch the ball a lot, and he's not really factored in to these wide receiver rankings. The third thing is, well, this is the fourth thing. Jordan Whittington had 50 catches for 652 yards and 1 touchdown last year. Not sure about the yards, how much that will improve, because now he's going from wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 3, and we didn't even have a wide receiver 3 last year. So he was really getting damn near wide receiver 1 type targets, right? He has to improve on the 50 catches. Hopefully he can improve on the 652 yards. And I think that 1 touchdown needs to go to like 5 touchdowns, right? If he's going to be the starting slot receiver, if we're going to be in a lot of 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers on the field, I think Jordan Whittington has to show a lot more explosiveness than he did last year. So I would like to see more than 50 catches as wide receiver 3. I would like to see more than 652 yards, but I won't be mad if that doesn't happen, because that is a good amount for your wide receiver 3, but definitely has to get that 1 touchdown up to about 4 or 5 touchdowns this year for Texas to be explosive on offense. And I think the last thing that needs to happen for Texas to live up to the number 2 wide receiver ranking in the country from on 3, right? It's Quinn Ewers has to be an all Big 12 performer, right? We saw last year where Quinn Ewers didn't necessarily live up to the number 1 overall recruit in the country type hype, but he was a true freshman. Maybe Sark didn't have the best year. The offensive line didn't have the best year. There were a lot of things going on, right? But you would expect him to come in this year, from everything we've seen, from everything we've heard, you expect him to be a lot better than he was last year. 2 quarterbacks make all Big 12. If Texas is going to have the second best wide receiver room in the country this year, it all starts with Quinn Ewers, right? They can't throw the ball to themselves. So to me, if Texas is going to have the number 2 wide receiver room in the country, then Quinn Ewers has to be one of the 2 best quarterbacks in the Big 12. And probably to live up to that number 2 ranking, he has to be first team all Big 12, which he's more than capable of with this offense under Steve Sarkisian if he comes in and takes care of business. So I think On 3 got it right in terms of Texas being the number 2 wide receiver room in the country, but that's mostly based on past production and talent. Can they live up to that number 2 ranking this year? That remains to be seen. A quick word from Built Bar, and then we're going to get into that conversation between me and Aaron Freeman from the Locked On Atlanta Falcons about none other than Bijan Robinson on the Mount Rushmore of Texas running backs. Hope you enjoy it. Looking for a delicious snack but don't want any of the sugar and calories? Then you need the best tasting protein bar ever built. You got to try this. If you're like me and you want to make healthier snack choices, but you don't want to compromise on taste, I've got just the thing for you. Built Bars and Built Puffs. Built Bars are healthy and taste amazing. Seriously, they taste so amazing you won't think they're good for you. You have to try this. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they are all covered in 100% real dark chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in amazing flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they are healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering Built Bars at Built.com, but now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. Well, you can still get your specialty flavors at Built.com. So head to the website, head to Walmart, head to Sam's Club, wherever you need to go to get your Built Bars today.
All right, everyone. We are back with another illustrious guest. He is none other than John Davis, the voice of Texas football and basketball over at Locked On Longhorns. And of course, if we're going to talk about Bijan Robinson and what he's bringing to the Atlanta Falcons, there is nobody who's better qualified than John to talk about him. John, my friend, welcome to Locked On Falcons.
Thanks for having me, man. Exciting times in Atlanta. Bijan Robinson is an Atlanta Falcon and somebody I've watched for the last 3 years on Saturday. Y'all get to enjoy him on Sunday. So thanks for having me on, and like I said, I'm excited for the Bijan era in Atlanta.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Bijan era in Texas. And so he was a highly recruited player that came in with a lot of expectations. And from my perspective, lived up to those expectations. But I'm just curious to get your thoughts on the 3 years that Bijan was in Texas.
Well, he exceeded expectations, right? Not just lived up to them, he exceeded them. When you leave your third year in college with the Doak Walker Award, the best running back in college football, I think that solidified that. But I think for the last 2 years, he's been the best running back in college football, and he's more than exceeded expectations at the University of Texas. And he kind of put himself on a Mount Rushmore of Texas running backs, which is crazy when you think about Earl Campbell, when you think about running backs like, Jamal Charles, Ricky Williams, right? Priest Holmes, Cedric Benson. When you mention those names, it's hard to be able to have a career that puts you amongst those names as well. And that's exactly what Bijan did for the last 3 years. When you talk about Texas running backs, you have to mention Bijan Robinson's name as one of the best to ever put on that burnt orange and white.
Absolutely. Now, it seems so easy to talk about how good a player Bijan is because everybody it's like immediately you recognize, like, yeah, he's really, really good. But one of the things that the Falcons talked about as one of the reasons why they selected him was not just because he is this obviously dynamic and skillful athlete and player on the football field, but the person that he is off the field. And I'm just curious to get your thoughts on Bijan the person as opposed to Bijan the player.
Yeah, I think that's why, half the Texas fan base are now Falcons fans, because Bijan Robinson was just that type of player that you really fell in love with, right, on the field and off the field. And it's funny because, like you said, as special as a player as he is on the field, special enough to be the 8th overall pick in the NFL draft, when you talk to Texas fans, it's who he is off the field. It's who he is as a person and a human being that really warms your heart, right? And that's why I think they were so comfortable taking him with the 8th overall pick. And like Arthur Smith said, he's genuine, right? It's not fake. He talks so much about his faith. He wears his faith on his sleeve, but he's just that type of person. And he's been that way since we were recruiting him out of high school in Arizona. And just from the camps to what he does in the community, I mean, he's the type of person, and we say this about people and it's not always true, but he genuinely is the type of person that you can't find anybody say anything bad about him, right? And I know it came down to, a conversation between maybe Bijan Robinson and Jalen Carter at number 8. But I think that's why you take Bijan Robinson at number 8, because Arthur Smith, I think is it Thomas Dimitrov, Arthur Smith, all of them, Arthur Blank, excuse me, Arthur Smith, all of the people in the building, right? Or no, Terry, is it Terry? I'm tripping.
It's
Terry. Okay, all right, my bad. My bad.
I was gonna let you work through it.
My bad, Falcons fans, right? I just support from a distance, right? Everybody in the building can sleep peacefully every night knowing that Bijan Robinson is on the roster and they have nothing to worry about. He is a better person and human being than he is football player. And that's crazy to say because he's a special football player as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So he's the type of player that's going to come with expectations because of where he was drafted and what he did in college. But because of the type of person that he is, you feel pretty good about him being able to shoulder those expectations, day one in the NFL. Is that fair?
No, I think so. I think so. And they're already talking about him being, one of the top picks in fantasy. And I think he's the favorite to be the offensive rookie of the year already. But, I think anything you put on Bijan's plate, he's able to handle. And, when I looked at what you all had last year, I think I had Cordero Patterson in fantasy. So y'all were able to run the ball pretty effectively, right? I think y'all had the 3rd ranked rushing attack. But you bring in Bijan Robinson, the type of player that's a superstar. I remember when I'm a Cowboys fan, right? And I remember when we had DeMarco Murray who ran for 1,000 yards, and then we took Ezekiel Elliott with the 4th overall pick. And you can say what you want about it now, but Ezekiel Elliott stepped right in and was the best running back in the NFL. That pick was worth it, right? We can, hindsight is 2020, right? We can look at it 6-7 years down the road and be like, oh, well, it didn't work out. We shouldn't have took him there. Ezekiel Elliott stepped in and was one of the best offensive players in football from day one. And I think Bijan Robinson represents that same type of player. I think the Atlanta Falcons with the number 8 pick got one of the best offensive weapons in the NFL. And it's going to be, interesting to see how they use them on Sundays. Because I also had Kyle Pitts on my fantasy team last year, and that didn't go great.
Yeah, I've heard that before. So we'll see if Arthur Smith can redeem you on that one this upcoming season. But you talk about Zeke and his impact right away, and Zeke was able to impact the Cowboys both as a runner and a receiver. And I think that's the thing that really makes Bijan so special, is he is one of those players that typically go high, like a Zeke Elliott, like a Christian McCaffrey, that we've seen in recent years get picked in the top 10 because he has that ability to impact both as a runner and a receiver. And I'm just curious, what were your thoughts on his skill set as a receiver at Texas, where it didn't feel like he was as featured as he probably could have been, but anytime it seemed like they threw him the ball, good things seemed to happen in that offense last year?
Yeah, You hit the nail on the head, right? I don't think that we used Bijan Robinson enough as a receiver or the way that Arthur Smith will use him in the NFL, because I think you can use him maybe not in the exact ways that you use Cordell Patterson, but I think you're going to see him a lot more in the NFL kind of one-on-one against linebackers, just with the ability to get open, and run routes for his quarterback. And we didn't do that a lot at Texas, but like you said, when he was catching the ball, it was spectacular, right? I've seen Bijan Robinson catch post routes down the field. I saw him catch a back shoulder turn around, 2-yard reception against Oklahoma when we were beating them 49-0. So he's shown a really good ability to catch the ball. I can't remember. God, I wish I could remember. It was either Brendan Marion, our wide receiver coach last year, or Tashard Choice, our running back coach, said he had the best hands on the team. I guess it would make more sense it would be a better quote if it was Brendan Marion, the wide receiver coach. So let's go with Brendan Marion, the wide receiver coach. He said that Bijan Robinson had the best hands on the team, and I truly believe that he has strong hands. But I think that the Atlanta Falcons and Arthur Smith can really tap into his route running ability, and I think that's going to be key to making this investment work out, right? Because all we want to talk about is what will Bijan Robinson look like 6 to 7 years from now, right? And part of that is, the Ezekiel Elliott, Le'Veon Bell, Todd Gurley syndrome, right? But I think the best way to keep him fresh and keep him upright and make sure that he's the running back for the Atlanta Falcons for a decade is to use him as much in the passing game. And I'm excited to see that because, like I said, we didn't see it a lot at Texas, and I know he's more than capable of it.
Yeah. Well, John, I appreciate you for your time. Are there any other tidbits that you want to share with the Locked On Falcons listeners about Bijan Robinson that maybe they don't necessarily know at this point?
I wouldn't say any tidbits. Like I said, he's just a great football player, a hell of a person. And, I've seen some debate. I've been on Twitter. And like I said, I just think this is the type of person that you make the face of your franchise, right? And this is the type of person that you spend the number 8 pick on, right? If you're trying to transcend your culture, right? If you're trying to become a winning organization again, like I said, I was telling him off camera, I used to live in McDonough, Georgia, right? 45 minutes away from Atlanta. So I've seen how Atlanta is when the Falcons are good. And this is the type of player that you bring in, not only to start to win football games, but to really kind of embrace and build that connection and build that bridge between the community and the Atlanta Falcons. So he's going to be a superstar in that community for the next decade, hopefully. And you got a really special person in Bijan Robinson. And like you said, you talk about taking running backs, number 8, whatever, but Bijan Robinson, I would want him on my football team any day and night. So got a really special one in Bijan for sure.
Absolutely. My final question for you, John. Have you tried the mustard?
I have not tried the mustard. I have bought the mustard. So they have pluckers out here and they have wings made with the mustard. I had those. Those were really good. I have lost 2 bets, right? I lost a bet last year that Texas would beat Oklahoma State. So I had to pay out that bet in Bijan mustard. I also lost a pick'em bet with our boy John Garcia, right? And so I had to send him the mustard, but I have not tried it. But I've spent over $50 in mustard towards losing bets and have not tried it once at all. So outside of some wings at Pluckers. So I can't tell y'all, but make sure y'all load up on it. It's going to be worth a lot of money someday. You know what I'm saying? Right. And it's good for, I hear pretzels, hot dogs, hamburger sandwiches, you name it, right? So go grab that Bijan mustard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, John, let the people know what you got going on over at Locked On Longhorns in the coming days, weeks, and over the course of the summer.
Yeah, so we're just going to be talking a lot about Arch Manning. No, I'm just kidding. But it's going to be a really good season. A season, Steve Sarkisian, who y'all are familiar with as well. Steve Sarkisian's 3rd year at the University of Texas, and we're expecting big things in our last year in the Big 12. We're expecting a Big 12 championship and hopefully maybe an outside chance at a college football playoff appearance. So as we continue to, get closer to the season, that's going to be our main focus, is talking about Sark in year 3 and hopefully getting Texas back on track, right? Texas and the Falcons are looking to get back to the glory days, and hopefully the Longhorns can do it this season.
Absolutely. Well, I will just say this, having watched Bijan a lot over the last couple of days, I'm hoping that Texas offensive line can take some steps, because it does feel like they were holding things. They were young last year. And so it's like,
no, for sure. Yeah. The interior offensive line wasn't great. We started 2 true freshmen on the offensive line, and then 1 player was starting for the first time. Also, our center was in place because somebody tore their ACL in training camp. So I don't think that was the 5 best we wanted to put out there. They were relatively young and inexperienced. We brought in, I don't know how much you follow college football recruiting, but we had brought in 7 offensive linemen in the 2022 class because that had been such a problem for years at the University of Texas. So we're hoping that by the time we get to the SEC, we can start to have a run of dominant offensive lines like Alabama and Georgia. But yeah, the tape didn't lie to you. We're not there yet.
Yeah, you're gonna need some guys up front once you get to the SEC. That's definitely true stuff.
But Bijan's so special, he won the Doak Walker Award behind that offensive line, right? And that's what y'all got with the number 8 pick. So be grateful. And number 7, look. I love the Falcons when Michael Vick was there. I love Younghoe Koo. I know y'all love Younghoe Koo, but he couldn't do it justice as a kicker, man. You got look. Bijan Robinson for real on a national level is going to reclaim that number 7 in that black, red, and white, man. So I'm really excited about that. I thought that was a dope number change. But shout out to Younghoe Koo for giving it up to the future, the prodigy Bijan Robinson, man.
Absolutely, John. Really appreciate you sharing your insights into Bijan Robinson, and we'll have to go check out that mustard to see what's what with that. And of course, guys, check him out at Jonzo Ball on Twitter, as well as Locked On Longhorns. Really appreciate you joining me on today's Locked On Falcons.
Yes, sir. And a lot of Falcons fans, I'm sure y'all have seen, a lot of Texas fans are now going to be Falcons fans. So welcome us with warm, and open hearts, right? Because there's so many Texas fans that did not care about the NFL until Thursday when Bijan Robinson got drafted, right? So there's a lot of Texas fans in the fan base now. So welcome us with warm and open hearts.
Well, I think the Texas bandwagoners are going to be a lot better than the Oregon bandwagoners that were on the team last year because of Marcus Mariota, who were insistent that the Falcons were a terrible organization because they didn't do right by Marcus Mariota. I hope that we do not have that relationship with the UT fans this year. I think we'll do right by Bijan this year.
Hopefully. Hey, just give him 25 touches a game and you won't have to worry about us saying anything, right?
All right. I look forward to that first game where he gets 8 carries and then the Texas fans are just going crazy. So I'm eagerly anticipating that one.
It's a possibility, man. It's a possibility. Thanks for having me, brother. For real.
Right,